Hello.
Hello. Tarek and I will now be presenting about Marxism and Marxian economics.
Yes, but before we start, let me walk you through the table of contents for today's presentation. So, of course, we'll first discuss Karl Marx and, well, his biography. Then we're going to walk you through the historical context of the times that he was living at. Later, Roman will show you Marx's theories and how they relate to our economic thoughts and the program. And then we'll wrap it up with the retrospects for Marx's theories, so how they relate to our current lives in today's world. So let's begin with introducing you Karl Marx, who was born in the 19th century, and as you may have expected, he was an economist. However, he was also a philosopher and a journalist. Well, let's just say he was a very controversial figure. Actually, his thought and what he was promoting actually got him exiled from both Germany and later France. So, before Karl Marx was born, the Industrial Revolution happened. It was in the 18th and 19th century when the technology skyrocketed and the milestones were being achieved in the production processes year by year. Well, the production became extremely more efficient, and it was continually becoming more efficient every year. However, the wages and the material conditions of the workers were not keeping up with this process. What it led to was many revolutions happening everywhere around Europe. The prime example of it is the French Revolution. It happened in the 18th century, and what we saw in there was the rise of bourgeoisie. Basically, the revolution in France marked the end of feudalism and the beginning of capitalism as we see it today. And Marx was analyzing those revolutions, and he knew that the reason for them happening was indeed the class conflicts in between different classes in the countries.
To understand Marx's views on revolutions and his whole theories, we need to look through his lens of historical materialism. Now, historical materialism is a theory that he coined that is derived from Hegelian dialectics, but founding them in material reality. What this means essentially is that he believes that history is dictated by material conditions, by conditions of production. He sees that the material conditions of the people are dictated by dynamic forces of production, like the labor level of skill or the level of technology, and the static relations inherent to production structures, like, for example, capitalism. The relation between the capitalist and the worker is static. It stays like that even when technology changes or when the workers become more skilled. Now, Marx says that there are classes in all stages of society, and there are upper classes and lower classes, which have very different material interests. For example, he says the capitalist class wants to accumulate wealth, meanwhile, the lower class wants to have fair wages, which do not for him coincide. And this leads to class conflict. And he says that with class conflict comes a change in systems, like what happened from feudalism to capitalism, and what he thinks might happen from capitalism to socialism. Now, to understand his analysis of capitalism, we need to first see his theory of value, his labor theory of value. Now, Marx essentially talks about how, for him, all value in production comes from labor. That is, for him, the only important metric. Now, he says, why in this scenario, where all production value, everything that we sell, comes from labor, why does labor not get out of that? Why is the wage of the worker lower than the value of the product he made? Now, what he sees is that this difference in remuneration is surplus value. And that is what the capitalist extracts. The owner of the factory, the owner of the cattle, whatever, that is the person that gets a cut of the money without putting in the value, putting in the labor. Marx says that this is an inherently exploitative relationship, and we will see why that is controversial in a few minutes. Now, in these conditions, obviously workers are in an uncomfortable position. They do not like to be exploited. But why do they not just leave? Why don't they just stop? well, there is in capitalism an inherent mass of unemployed workers, the reserve army of the unemployed, which have a very high demand for work because they don't have anything, and they will accept even low wage jobs. And what this means is that even when workers don't want to be in the company they work for, if they leave, they'll just be replaced. There won't be no significant change. And well, his analysis of capitalism is and was mostly for his time very, very controversial because he sees the exploitative relationship within it as something inherent to capital and to capitalism. There is the struggle of the capitalist versus the proletariat. There is a constant class struggle, and he thinks that it is such an unfair system that it can only be overturned, that can only be a revolution. And now this is in very stark contrast to Adam Smith or Ricardo, for example, who view capitalism as kind of the vessel for the ideal economy, or for it's a neutral thing. For Marx, he sees in his context. Let's remember, technology is replacing labor. It's getting better, quicker, and everything is getting more efficient. But somehow, the workers are not seeing it. And he also analyzed business cycles. He was the first economist to see them, and within them there are the business crises. Essentially, business goes bad, then it goes good, then it goes bad again. And what happens when it goes bad is that capitalists have to cut costs. They don't want to lose. And when they cut costs, wages get cut, workers get laid off, higher unemployment, lower wages, but somehow the capitalists kept enriching themselves. Now, this just leads to concentration of wealth. And what Marx essentially said was that this will continue happening. This will continue happening. And because of this, a revolution will have to happen. And what happens after the revolution? Well, Marx says, first, the workers should establish a socialist state, which is simply a state where all the means of production, the factories, the fields, and everything is controlled directly or indirectly by the workers, like through co-ops or through the state, in whichever way, but just not by capitalists, just to get rid of the exploitation. Distribution of resources is based on the contribution that you made to the value, but he sees it as ultimately a transitional phase. Communism is the end goal. Communism is a classless, moneyless society where there is no market. Everything is based on cooperation rather than, in his view, exploitation. And here there is collectivized ownership of all means of production.
So where can we actually see Marx's work in our current world? Well, there have been a lot of events, even in our very recent history, that we can clearly relate to Karl Marx's work. Starting with the centralization of the capital that is current in pretty much all around the world. The richest 1% that actually holds around 40% of total world wealth. It is a crazy inequality. And this is exactly what Karl Marx predicted. Well, we can also see at the COVID pandemic, the wages decreased, the unemployment rose. However, the richest people in the world, the owners of the big companies, actually managed to double, sometimes even triple their wealth. And once again, this capital distribution from the poor to the rich increases the inequality, which is exactly what we're talking about. One other example we have is from America from the 1980s, which after the crisis from the 1970s, when Ronald Reagan became the president, he deregulated the America's labor market heavily. What it meant was that the employers didn't have to pay their workers nearly as much anymore. In the result, as the efficiency of the wages and the productivity of it continued to grow, the wages stayed constant. They more or less stagnated, and the inequality once again skyrocketed. Ever since then, the wages have not been increasing nearly as much as the productivity of the workers, which only makes the problem worse. Thank you very much for the attention. We hope you liked our presentation.
We hope you learned a lot. Bye.